Thank you. That's a tough act to follow, a comedian, huh? I'm going to tell you something a little bit more serious. And my name is Rafael Fonseca. I'm the chair of the Department of Internal Medicine at Mayo Clinic in Arizona. I entitled my talk, "We're Close to Curing Cancer If We Allow Ourselves." I'm going to tell you a little bit about my journey. As you can see in the title, by the way, I love that name, Mex I Can. I'll tell you a little bit about how things happen up from the moment that I was raised here in Mexico and where we are currently with the various treatments against cancer. Before we do that, I want to show you this image. This is an image that all physicians use when we talk about the various treatment options for patients and so forth. And it's called the physician. And you see a doctor there that's attending to a young girl who's laying in those chairs. She's quite ill, obviously. He's trying to use the light of the lamp to find what's going on with her. You see the mother in despair in the background and her shoulder being held by dad. And this painting from the late 1800s is used to exemplify the humanistic benevolence aspects of what every good physician should possess. And I would tell you, in 2016, most physicians are like that. Now this guy is missing something that we have now, and that is tools. This physician did not have the surgical instruments or the medications to help a girl like this. It's quite possible, and we don't know what she had, that she could have died from a simple thing like a strep throat. So as much as this image is used to portray, perhaps with some nostalgia, what some would say maybe in a better time of medicine, I'll tell you, to me this is quite sad. We couldn't do much for patients. And as I walk you through the slides, I'd like to make the case that the world in medicine is so much better, and there has been tremendous progress, and we must remain optimistic. Now, sometimes progress happens in big leaps, but more often than not, it's in small, incremental steps. And I thought of an example for that, and as you know, this is a common image of ants crossing a river. And it is the strength of the link of those ants that allow them to cross that river, but it's the incremental, individual step of each one of the ants that provides the strength to the river. So I'm going to suggest to you that you think of these ants as cancer researchers. And I'll propose that I am one of those ants, and that's what my life has been dedicated to. Now, when all is said and done, some will say, well, I was the ant in the center, I was the anchor ant, or I was the strongest ant. But it does not matter as long as the bridge is strong. And this really holds true for any human endeavor, doesn't it? So I actually was born in Mexico. I grew up in Mexico. I was very fortunate in that we had the means. I could go to school, so I had no limitations in my life. So I walked through my ways, and I went into medical school here. And in a very supporting and nurturing environment. And perhaps I do remember one time when one teacher told us, you should not study that. That is beyond the scope of the reality. It's not something you're going to see. And me and several other colleagues thought, how outrageous. Do not put limits. We don't know where we can go. We're going to try harder. Now, this is not unique to Mexico. This happens all over the world. I'll give you another example where that happened. So, finished medical school, went for training, and ultimately landed in my current work at the Mayo Clinic. This was passing through Florida, Minnesota, and now for the last 12 years in the state of Arizona. And because of the work we do and our focus on treating cancer patients, we've been able to attract other very strong ants. When I first went down there were about 6 oncologists. Now we have over 40 oncologists. This is a new building we just moved in the last 4 months, and provides state-of-the-art cancer care for patients with all sorts of cancers. I particularly specialize in one that is called myeloma, or multiple myeloma. But it was that determination that led us to grow this part of the practice. And in fact, there was a second instance where someone said, you cannot go down there. I was living in Rochester. I lived there for 10 years. And someone said, you cannot go down to Arizona. It's very small, sort of a crazy move. But lo and behold, we have the center now, of all of which we're a small part, an ant there, if you may. What I would argue is probably one of the preeminent cancer centers of the Southwest of the United States. One where the team of ants I work with, and this disease myeloma, we can claim to ourselves more than 700 scientific publications for the disease, and I'll show you some of the progress that we have made in this regard. Now, one of the things I don't like about the building is that it said Cancer Center on the top, and I would love to think of a future where people go back and say they had a cancer center buildings. How is that possible? Well, that's a tuberculosis hospital. Not long ago, people went to the so-called sanatoriums so they could actually be healed from their tuberculosis. They spent time there, and ultimately, they died there. There were not very good tools for the treatment of these patients. Now, just let me give you some numbers. In the 1900s, life expectancy was 48 years. 2010, 78 years. 30 years gain of life expectancy. Now, back then, every year, out of 100,000 people, you would have almost 400 dying of different diseases. And in fact, you'll see the numbers almost the same of people that died of tuberculosis there as it is of the number of people that die of cancer nowadays. Just yesterday, the Centers for Disease Control told us that cancer will be the #1 killer of people in the United States. And I would suggest to you that we have the tools to finally make change after so many years. And I'll share with you some examples. Now, we have treated cancer historically in ways that you would think about, and it would just make you cringe. Who wants to go through that treatment? Some of them are very effective, so you can treat, for instance, head and neck cancer with radiation, surgery sometimes for early-stage breast cancer. Even people with advanced cancer, like testicular cancer, can be cured with chemotherapy, and sometimes, of course, a combination of them all. But we need and we must do better than that. And we have better tools to achieve that. So I'm going to show you a few examples of what's happening right now in the realm of cancer treatment. Now, one of my favorite stories is this one, and you don't have to be a physician to understand this graph. I'll explain it to you. If you have a perfect treatment and no one dies, the curve is flat like this. And if you die right away, the curve goes like this. So the flatter the curve, the better. And I've put different time zones there for different stages of the treatment of a condition called chronic myelogenous leukemia. Now, when I was in training, most patients died of this, and in fact, if they survived, they oftentimes had very, very serious complications. But as time has gone by, the curve continues to go up. And you see there in the top blue line, the curve that currently represents the survival of patients with chronic myelogenous leukemia. And this is taking 1 pill a day. Patients take 1 pill a day, resume their normal life, and for all practical purposes, have a normal life expectancy. We want that for every single cancer patient. It's not quite possible yet. Now, this is probably one of the most important developments in cancer therapeutics in the last year. In fact, this was just published a couple of weeks back in the major medical journal, the New England Journal of Medicine. Now, again, you already know how to interpret this curve, so the higher up they go, the better. And what you see there in that blue curve are patients with lung cancer that are getting a new form of immunotherapy, and they're being compared to lung cancer patients who are getting the traditional forms of chemotherapy, shown by the gray curve. The type of chemotherapy that makes patients lose hair, develop nausea, lose weight, lose their appetite. And now, we have at the end of 2 years, about 65% of the patients alive, arguably some of them cured, things that were quite impossible before. Now, there's other treatments that are being developed for cancer. This is one of the most exciting areas. It's called the CAR T cells. The CAR T cells are a way through which, using genetic engineering, we can target specific cancer cells with what we call T cells. You'll have T cells in your body, and normally they recognize things that are abnormal, and they go around and do surveillance of our bodies, and they attack cancer cells. Now they can be trained to do that right away. And in fact, this is changing in a very dramatic way the ability for physicians to cure some diseases, such as certain leukemias. Now, sometimes we need just to go back and understand how normal cells work. And I'll give you another example. This is a form of leukemia that is called hairy cell leukemia. You see the cell there in the bottom right. It looks kind of hairy. It's a black and white picture. And it turns out this was a horrible disease. In the olden days, the hospitals were full with patients with leukemias like this. And they had complications, they had infections. And someone noticed, some of you may remember this kid, the bubble kid. A kid who was born with an immunodeficiency syndrome. So he had no immunity, and had to live inside a bubble. Now, someone realized that if we use what we knew about that kid to treat his leukemia, we might be able to make a big difference. They developed this medicine called cladribine, and nowadays it takes 5 days of treatment, and all of them are cured from their leukemia. Again, brilliant, not a reality yet for most cancer patients. But this and what I'm showing you with immunotherapy give us glimpses of what's about to come. We can see it in the horizon. And if anything today, I'd like my pitch to be that we're getting closer and closer to the better treatment of cancer patients. Now, I told you I specialize in myeloma, multiple myeloma. This is a cancer that affects adults, predominantly the elderly. And when I was in training, no one wanted to do this. You were the last in line if you were doing myeloma. The survival back then was in the order of about 2 to perhaps 3 years. Now, nowadays, it's not unusual for patients to live in the excess of 10 years. And in fact, I have several patients in my practice, 15 years and going, with a normal life, with an ability to be back with their families and back in the workplace. And that is in great part because of the list of medications that I put there in the center. We've seen development and approval of about 10 new medications that allow us to control the disease. Still, myeloma, again, remains a major threat to the person who's diagnosed with it, but we're making a lot of progress. So if I show you the curve again, this is what we have learned about multiple myeloma. That's what I do in the clinic. All the patients I see have multiple myeloma. And you can see the curves, again, continue to fan upwards. Each one of those curves represents a 5-year period. And the very last one that I showed you at the very top, green, is actually up to 2010. There's been tremendous progress over the last 5 years. So when we reach maturity, I hope and anticipate that curve will continue to go upwards. But again, we cannot stop where we are right now. There's some significant challenges right now for cancer researchers. And in fact, there's some potential and real dangers that could stop innovation. And some strong forces are opposing progress. We're all concerned, and rightfully so, because of the cost of these medications and the previous failure of some of the treatments that have been tried for patients. But we know again, and predominantly through some of the tools I showed you, that we can see cures for more patients in the horizon. I'll suggest to you that what we need to do is to remain optimistic. As a hematologist, as an oncologist, I have to wake up every morning and think that the future is going to be better than what we have. I simply cannot accept that today's best is going to be forever's best. And I'll tell you a story. I'm happily married now, but about 4 years ago, around this time, my late wife was diagnosed with metastatic breast cancer and went only to die a few months later at the age of 42. So my 2 kids, one of whom is in the audience, will not get to see their mother. And I would like for kids, families, and everyone else to have the opportunity to complete a life. So we should avoid nihilism, we should remain optimistic, and I think the tools are within our disposal. There's a saying in Spanish that I love, tanto nadar para ahogarse en la orilla. Estamos cerca y no podemos parar. Well, that's what we must do, and that's what we should continue to push for. And I would like to have families like the one on the right be able to send Christmas cards to their family members. In fact, that's a Christmas card of one of my patients that has been out from a stem cell transplant and received therapy for myeloma and remains in a full remission. And for doing that, we need to join forces and we need to remain focused. What you see on the top left is the first myeloma patient ever described in the literature. Her name was Sarah Newberry. She probably lived about 4 to 6 months. And I put the Greek image before because her survival back then was probably no different from the survival of myeloma patients in ancient Greece. So with that, I'm going to conclude. Again, thank you for your attention, and thank you for your support.